Hello, and welcome to the first session in the 2021 Meg Quigley Summer Series. I'm Jackie Wilson, co-executor of the Meg Quigley Vivaldi Competition and Bassoon Symposium. I think that many of you were here with us for last summer's sessions, but if you missed any or would like to watch them again, recordings are available on our website, megquigley.org. Also, be sure to follow Meg Quigley on social media for announcements of future weekly summer series events. Our goal with these is to feature a diverse array of voices and for these sessions to serve bassoon students, avocational players, and professionals alike. If you would like to support our continued efforts in these areas and beyond, visit megquigley.org/donate to become a friend of Meg Quigley. Today's session is entitled Recentered Music Learning, Operationalizing Social Work Principles as Anti-Racist, Anti-Oppressive, Socially Just Music Praxis. This is one in a series of ongoing actions undertaken by Meg Quigley to demonstrate our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only through these sessions, but by continuing to engage in measurable actions toward change as an organization. As you enjoy today's session, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature. Afterward, we invite you to join us for a happy hour Zoom meeting to reflect on today's session, play a few games, and enjoy each other's company. The information for that Zoom meeting can be found at megquigley.org/happy hour immediately following this event. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's session, Midori Samson.
Thank you, Jackie. Hi, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar names and new names also. My name is Midori Samson, she, her, hers. I'm calling from Madison, Wisconsin. I know several of you have seen me do some version of this talk and this introduction, so I'm sorry if this is redundant, but I hope there are some new things in here so that it's still interesting. I finished my DMA last week where I defended this research. And usually I would want to do this where we're interacting a lot more and where I am asking you questions and prompting you to think on your own about the topics. But since that's not possible in this format, I invite you to please utilize the chat for that. And also, I look forward to seeing you all with a wine or a tea where we can continue the conversation after this. Okay, so like many of you listening, I think you care about social justice, you care about issues of DEI, and I've always had that care also. But what I found as I went through my training and my education was that music alone, since it's so ensconced in tradition and white supremacy, that there were a lot of gaps in my training to talk about issues of social justice. And so I look to social work as a discipline that can help me fill those gaps and help me get kind of outside the dominant narrative that exists in our field. So I recommend that we borrow principles from social work to be precise and scientific, to give definitions to the terms that are often overused or misused, like social justice and like equity. And I think social work is very actionable, and that's often something we miss when we're thinking so academic about a topic. That's why I go to social work, to fill in some of these gaps. I also want to just call out some of my biases and my relevant identities that affect how I do this and how I define justice. I have benefited from the very systems that I am critiquing. I went to a conservatory and then I went to big state universities where I trained. I did an orchestral training program in Chicago. So I have certainly benefited from all the things that I'm critiquing, and that is important to acknowledge. I also always bring into this my identity as a biracial woman. My mom is white and my dad is Filipino-Japanese mix. I carry with me my grandmother's experience in the Japanese internment camps during World War II, and my grandfather's treacherous immigration from the Philippines. So of course, those things influence the way I think about justice. I'm going to share my screen. So here's my agenda for today. First, we did my biases and why social work. Next, I use Paulo Freire's banking concept to kind of problematize the things I'm critiquing, so I will introduce that. Then I want to talk about these 3 ethical principles, the National Association of Social Workers ethical principles, this 3 areas of practice, and then trauma-informed care and design. These are 3 existing frameworks from social work. And then I will finish by introducing a new framework that I have created as part of my research that brings in social justice principles and synergizes them with music. That's the agenda. So first, this is Paulo Freire's banking concept of education, and I use this as a point of departure for the rest of the talk. Paulo Freire was a Brazilian philosopher who said that the way that we often teach when we're using banking education, which I'll define in a minute, is it mirrors oppressive society as a whole. It assumes that students are empty, needing to be filled with knowledge of an expert teacher. And he defines banking education with these practices. And as I go through these, think about what is familiar and what is parallel to music. The teacher teaches and the students are taught. The teacher knows everything and the students know nothing. The teacher thinks and the students are thought about. The teacher talks and the students listen meekly. The teacher disciplines and the students are disciplined. The teacher chooses and enforces his choice and the students comply. The teacher acts and the students have the illusion of acting through action of the teacher. The teacher chooses the program content and the students who are not consulted adapt to it. The teacher confuses the authority of knowledge with his own professional authority, which he sets in opposition to the freedom of the students. And the teacher is the subject of the learning process, while the pupils are mere objects. So again, think about theory classes, private lessons, orchestral rehearsals, all the things that center the teacher who is the expert, or the conductor who's the expert, or the composer who is the keeper of the tradition. There are so many parallels. And I am arguing for recentering, that's why I use that word in the title of the talk and in my framework. I'm arguing for recentering all of our activities so that instead of centering toward tradition and dominance and authority, we center toward students themselves, audience members who are maybe new to music, or anyone who is new and is not the dominant one in the relationship. So I see a lot of potential solutions when we look at existing frameworks in social work. So this first one, the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics and Ethical Principles. As you all know, bassoonists don't really have a code of ethics. We rely on tradition to make a lot of our musical decisions. So what if, for a moment, we imagine that we do borrow these ethical principles from this discipline? The first, there's 6 of them. The first is service. Social workers or bassoonists' primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. Bassoonists elevate service to others above self-interest. Bassoonists draw on their knowledge, values, and skills to help people in need and to address social problems. Social justice. Bassoonists challenge social injustice. Bassoonists pursue social change, particularly with and on behalf of vulnerable and oppressed individuals and groups of people. Dignity and worth of the person. Bassoonists respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. Bassoonists treat each person in a caring and respectful fashion, mindful of individual differences and diversity. Importance of human relationships. Bassoonists recognize the central importance of human relationships. Bassoonists understand that relationships between and among people are an important vehicle for change. Bassoonists engage people as partners in the helping process. Bassoonists seek to strengthen relationships among people in a purposeful effort to promote, restore, maintain, and enhance the well-being of individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. Integrity. Bassoonists behave in a trustworthy manner. Bassoonists are continually aware of the profession's mission, values, ethical principles, and standards, and practice in a manner consistent with them. And competence. Bassoonists practice within their areas of competence and develop and enhance their professional expertise. Bassoonists continually strive to increase their professional knowledge and skills and to apply them in practice. So we're kind of pretty good at this last one of competence. We practice. We enhance our professional expertise by coming to events like this one and this whole summer series, but we aren't taught to make the rest of these a priority. And often they are missed opportunities for doing something more impactful and putting more of an emphasis on humanity. So for example, dignity and worth of the person. We've all had conductors call us bassoon or bassoon 2 instead of by our name. And names are important. And what if instead we learned names and said them right every time and spelled them right every time? Another example is for this importance of human relationships. The very standard spoken program note introduction at the beginning of a concert that centers composer only. But what if instead it was doing an activity with the audience to make music with them, to prepare them for what they're going to hear, or speaking about a personal experience with the piece that centers the performer's humanity instead of facts about the composer. There are many examples of traditions that we are pressured to conform to that contradict these principles. And this is a moment when, if I was talking to all of you on a normal call, I would ask us to say those out loud. So please write them in the chat if you feel compelled and if anything comes to mind. Another framework that I want to talk about is using a three-tiered approach to practice and intervention. So very generally, social workers design care at 3 levels simultaneously. Micro, which addresses individuals and families. Mezzo, which works with groups and organizations. And macro, which looks at large scale and systemic and policy change. I think, again, musicians are really good at this micro level. We do like a one-time community engagement concert or work closely with one student or individuals. But I'm arguing that we could be making more of an impact, be more ethical and sustainable if we are also addressing these levels too, and not just focused on one and only one. I want to shout out a couple of organizations that are doing this really well that I've worked with. Artists Striving to End Poverty is an arts organization based in New York that leads arts and music classes for children who usually do not access music classes or arts classes. And they do this all around the world by bringing in professional artists as teaching artists. At the micro level, they have this new Changemaker scholarship that gives scholarship money to Black students entering college who are doing social justice work in their community. And they have teaching artist fellowships that pay excellent teaching artists to continue doing their work in their community. At Mezzo, this is where these arts classes that I just introduced come in. They design arts classes and curricula in partnership with schools and community organizations around the world. And then at the macro level, they host monthly free and open trainings for teaching artists where they train us to use trauma-informed strategies and culturally responsive strategies, and all of these critical pedagogy techniques that when they're addressing so many artists at once, it's really making this macro change to start implementing more of those strategies into arts teaching. Another organization that is doing these three areas is Notes for Peace, which partners with the Chicago Symphony and the Civic Orchestra of Chicago. They facilitate workshops where families who have lost their children to gun violence work closely with Chicago musicians and composers to write songs to mourn them and remember them. And those songwriting sessions, I say that they're addressing micro because they're working directly with individuals and families. The songs get a really beautiful quality recording that is archived online and is distributed for widespread listening. And then because it's distributed, this is a really effective tool for advocating for policy change around gun violence. And with Yo-Yo Ma as a celebrity spokesperson, they're able to make an even bigger macro level impact with those policies. My next invitation to you is to think about what areas of practice any project you do is addressing. And if it's addressing one and not all three, what elements can you add so that it's addressing all three at the same time? Let's look at another framework from social work, and this is trauma-informed care and design. I take this from the Committee on Temporary Shelter, which advocates for long-term solutions to ending homelessness. But again, there are lots of ideas that we can borrow in music and lots of parallels I see. A program, organization, or system that is trauma-informed realizes the widespread impact of trauma, understands potential paths for recovery, responds by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies and practices, and seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. I am especially interested in thinking about trauma-informed design principles, and I prompt us to think about the physical environment that we present concerts in, and thinking about, are they trauma-informed? And if they're not trauma-informed, then who are we accidentally leaving out or saying, you should not attend this concert because it's not trauma-informed? So if you think about the kind of typical concert hall in the European tradition, let's ask these questions that the Committee on Temporary Shelter asks of their own rehab and housing spaces. How does it impact individuals' sense of identity, worth, and dignity? How does it impact mood and behavior? How does it promote sense of safety and calm? Does it avoid crowdedness? Does it avoid furniture arrangements that may be perceived as authoritative? I think about crowded seating where you're sharing armrests, and furniture arrangements where literally you see how much someone paid based on where they're sitting in the hall and how close it is to the front or how elevated it is. Not to mention the stage often being elevated and better lit, for example. Do audience members have personal space? Do they have clear sight lines, ability to rearrange furniture, ability to decide where to sit and where to look? Do they have autonomy over their listening experience? Again, think about this and think about chairs are bolted down, they face the same direction. There's often not autonomy over the listening experience because you're instructed to sit in a place and listen and clap at the right time. These halls don't do well on this rubric. And then finally, is it welcoming? There are so many experiences about going to a concert hall that might not be welcoming. So I want to share a musical example that might have potential to solve some of these problems. I think the virtual concert platform that we've all gotten way too used to in the last year has a lot of potential for being more trauma informed, especially in regard to this offering choice and autonomy over the listening experience. So this piece by Filippo Santoro is called Remote for Bassoon and Applied Technology. And in person, there is still the autonomy element and the choice element because it's aleatoric. He has 20 short 1-minute segments of music, and the audience logs onto a phone and votes for which segment comes next, and that's the one that the performer walks to and plays. But during the pandemic, an in-person performance of Remote is not possible. So I wanted to create an asynchronous version that still captures that element of choice and is more trauma-informed for that reason. So here's my little game that I created with a colleague who knows how to do fancy computer stuff that I don't know how to do. I kept going to him and saying, can we do this? Can we do this? And he made it happen. So here's the game. I am going to share my screen so that you can see what it looks like, but I invite you to play with it at the end because I won't go through the whole thing. When you go to bit.ly/bassoon game, you get a welcome screen that tells you what to do. And then you see this page. The curtain opens, and then you're instructed to click 1A. And this is the first segment. I hope I'm sharing sound. And while at home you would have the choice between these, I will just make the choice for you. But again, please play with it later. And then you choose between 2A and 1B. I want to do 1B. Let's just do one more. Let's do 1C. So that's the idea for remote. And what I hope you get a sense of if you play with it later is the feeling of you can make the choice. Um, you can you have autonomy over the experience, and especially if you don't consider yourself a composer, or maybe you haven't accessed that kind of music making before, you have that sense of I am a composer, I am in control. And what I love about this too is that Filippo is recentering away from himself. He's giving up the power, which says it communicates so much trust, so much agency, and it validates any listener as part of the creative process. So let's keep going. I will share my screen again. The last framework I want to introduce is this one that I've created, borrowing social justice principles that I found across the empirical social work literature. It is meant to be a generalizable rubric. It's made up of tenets that I found across the literature. So if we're redefining these as relevant to music, it's meant to be a rubric for creating something that's closer to a more socially just classical music landscape. It also aims to kind of synergize all of the ideas that I've talked about already with the ethical principles and with the three-tiered approach and with trauma-informed care. And then primarily I'm aiming to offer something that subverts Freire's banking concept. So here are the tenets. Artistry. Music and the arts are the vehicle for implementing all the other tenets that follow. Trustworthiness. Musicians behave in a professional and trustworthy manner to protect the well-being of learners and colleagues. Diversity. Musicians champion pieces that represent diverse composers and creators. Equity. Musicians curate experiences that allow equitable participation and appreciation regardless of the listener's prior experience. Access. Musicians eliminate as many barriers as possible that make engagement with music difficult for listeners. Collaboration. Musicians are partners who collaborate with their constituents rather than make music for or at listeners. Musicians make music with others. Agency. Musicians provide listeners with opportunities for agency over their musical experiences. Experimentation. Musicians nurture learning and listening environments where play and experimentation are encouraged. Musicians prioritize process over perfection. Validation. Musicians validate individuals' interpretations, experiences, creations, and opinions. They curate musical experiences that do not require specific or correct responses. And self-reflection. Musicians use all interactions with constituents as feedback. They use feedback as an opportunity to reflect and improve upon their ability to meet the needs of listeners. So I invite you to use one or a few or all of these as lenses for future engagements and activities to see kind of how does a musical experience I'm in exemplify or contradict any of these, and what does that mean for creating more social justice in the discipline. I will finish my kind of lecture-y talk before we talk through questions. I will finish with a piece of music that I think exemplifies everything that I've talked about today, and especially my framework here. Brandon Scott Rumsey wrote Crystals on Peace. He is a trusted friend and colleague, and he's my co-director of Winds Ensemble, which is an organization that we lead music composition workshops in partnership with social impact organizations all over the world working with children. So he composed Crystals on Peace to mimic the childlike play that we try to create in our classrooms. We use this poem template. So this is an activity we do with students where they can fill in the blank, and we validate every response, like I've talked about. And then this poem can be used as lyrics for a song, or like you see in Crystal's, he has me pair each line of text with a musical gesture. You'll also see, and you see this in the score here, he's leaving a lot. He's again taking away his power and his dominance, and he's leaving a lot up to me, the performer. He wrote this so that it can be played by any level of player. He has another version of this score where the notes are left totally blank. This is totally open to a player's other interpretation. And then you see here these camera angles instructions, because he wrote this during the pandemic and wanted a way to kind of shrink the distance between us. It gets really close up to my face and my body, to kind of emphasize the humanity part of this and again shrink the distance that the pandemic caused. This invites agency, as I've described, validation, collaboration, access, equity, and it recenters away from composer only. So I hope I'm sharing sound. Someone tell me in the chat if I'm not. But here is Crystal's on Peace. It's about a little over 4 minutes long. Me. I can be authentic, be present. I offer these tunes as peace. I am beautiful, smart, kind of funny. I love my bunny. His name is Fang. I wish I could give hugs right now. I fear going back to normal, actually. I know we probably shouldn't. I see pizza and rosé in my future. I dream about my teeth falling out. What do you think that means? I create fearlessly from my heart. I am here for you. All right. That's it. That's all I prepared for this. And I can't wait to keep the conversation going with whatever questions you have. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Wonderful job. That was such phenomenal content. All my creative juices and thoughts are just swirling around. Um,
Amazing.
if those of you in the call can go ahead and put the questions that you have in the Q&A. I actually have a question I'd love to jump off with. I loved your discussion of the trauma-informed care and design and the accountability for how the concert hall is and is not responding. And I wonder if you've given any thought to or had ideas for ways to implement this within the ensemble. I've heard many of my
Mm.
BIPOC colleagues talk about trauma happening within the orchestra and their experiences there. Garrett McQueen speaks about it very openly on Triloquy often. Um, so I just wondered if that had been something you'd considered.
Um, I mean, not too much in depth because we haven't been doing it for the last year. That's why I targeted like what was possible in this moment. But I that feels like such an insurmountable, like huge thing. Um, and I think it takes individual work, individual level in order to make it feel not like such a big thing. Um, I think a lot about hierarchy, especially in ensembles, and how that's captured spatially and in our behavior.
Mhm.
I don't know what the solution is, but I think it feels. I really like individual level action in order to then kind of build up to the bigger policy stuff and the stuff that feels like we can't take it down now. But if individuals are making adjustments, I think that's a place to start. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things when you start to pull the thread, you start to see all of the threads that are there to be
Right.
considered. It's such an applicable methodology. And
Hmm.
along those lines, Doug had a question
Mm.
wondering about the possibilities and status of incorporating this social work awareness into the modern conservatory training and curriculum, and what you see as the opportunities and challenges without killing the spirit.
This is another like insurmountable big machine, I feel. But again, I think about individual level and like this is stuff that I do within my studio. Individual level, so just me. I mean, I don't want to be a troublemaker in my job. I mean, I think that's like a big fear that all of us have, and I have a lot of privilege to be able to even give this talk without fear of retribution. Um, but so, for example, in my studio, students do, I stole Kristen Wolf Jensen's basic skill curriculum where students are checking off different skills at their own pace, um, that are fundamental bassoon things. But alongside those are readings about like the racism that was on display when Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer,
Mhm.
or articles about issues of injustice with trans folks in opera. So those are things that I get my students thinking about, and I put them in my syllabus alongside the curriculum of make 16 reads and also play these scales for a grade so that it's considered equal and not an extracurricular like how it was in my training. Um, yeah.
Does that enter your studio class
Mm-hmm.
approach as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like the first activity we did of the semester last year was I had everybody, we were in the process of writing Crystals on Peace, and so I had the students do their own poem template and then write their own little gestures, and then we talked about why that is a radical and more accessible approach to composition and to performing a bassoon solo, and that was like the studio class unit for a few weeks.
Very cool. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more when you were talking about the mezzo and macro
Mm,
social work care. You referenced sustainability, and one thing, and in the Ramsey piece, you talked about I fear going back to normal, and I don't think we should. And that's one thing that's really been on my mind is the kind of taking for granted that the status quo is still going to work and
mm.
questioning the relevance of what we do and how it relates to the work of today. And so I just love to maybe hear you expand on the thought of the intersection of these comments, tradition, and the sustainability of what we do.
The first thing that comes to mind is I hate to be all like about generational, and like I hate to be that age where I'm talking about generations, but the generation of students that are entering college now in this moment, I think are more active and more engaged than ever before, and just will not and should not tolerate what was tradition without talking about this stuff. I don't think it will be possible. I don't think people will continue to tolerate not changing a lot of this. That's the first thing that comes to mind with like who is starting now. Um, but again, I'll emphasize that still my work is really individual and small. I'm really just doing what I can manage. That's also to protect my own resilience and um, my own sustainability. Um, and I guess what it's going to take, the like first step that I'm arguing for now is that if all of us are doing that individual micro level adjusting, there will be no choice but to do it at mezzo and macro too.
Right. Yeah, no, I love so many of these ideas, and as a Native person, they occurred to me as very in line with an Indigenous worldview. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
medicine wheel teaches us that the young and the adult and the elders have to act all in balance with one another, and
Mm,
that the adults and elders are not of greater importance societally than of the young, and that there must be a respect for the young. And as I visit those things, it occurs to me that maybe your approach is applicable beyond the classroom, which is where my mind immediately went to. And I went, man, our conferences don't make any space for
mm-hmm.
student or pre-professional
Mm-hmm.
other than sit in the chair and absorb. You know, we are
Right.
the, it's very much modeled in those environments that we say are for everyone or that we say are for community.
Yeah, and that's also why I feel bad about the format of this event right now. And I'm so glad that there's a happy hour to talk about it later, because it is like really against everything I'm talking about for me to just teacher lecture at everyone. But I think this is a huge thing we can take from the environmental justice movement. They always have youth at the table. They always have youth involved in making change. So yeah, the one way to do that is involve students in what they'll be learning and how.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's a way to keep it so exciting and fresh.
Hmm.
It's occurred to me that my students' generation, they don't even necessarily consider some of these things radical. It's
Right.
very organic to them. And, those of us in the professional realm, we can kind of default to questioning. Even
Hmm.
in our panel at the virtual symposium, there was the immediate response was, but how will we also teach standard rep if we invite in?
Hmm.
I think a
Hmm.
defensiveness to
Hmm.
questioning, and I find that young people don't necessarily bring that baggage in. They're excited and kind of organically bringing these things to their music making.
Totally. Yeah.
Awesome. Other questions from I'm hogging all the questions. What questions do we have from the audience? I can keep going if I need to, but I'd love to make
There,
room.
I see one more, unless we already answered it
Well, John.
from. Oh,
Here we go.
oh, oh,
Yes, John Steinmetz was wondering about incorporating the principles into your
got it.
teaching. I feel like you answered that, but if you have anything else to,
No, I answered it for now.
awesome. Stephanie is asking, our classical universe is so focused on awarding the best players and letting everyone else fend for themselves. Is there a way to reconcile this with the principles of social work and valuing every individual?
This is this is like asking for a paradigm shift in everything, in a lot of things. So I'll just start with the first thing that comes to mind is Maud Hickey is a critical pedagogy music ed scholar who talks about how what if music composition was in like a standard beginning in kindergarten curriculum, and is kind of the prerequisite to learning an instrument, because at that little tiny age to be teaching composition is all about individual and helping youth find a muse, and is not about technique, or perfection. And I love this because it it shifts away from instrumental teaching, which often I think parallels colonization and um, colonialism, to be striving for excellence on an instrument. And so I love, what if we emphasized more composition as enhancing individual voice? And that's why my organization teaches composition instead of applied instruction. And it's why my applied bassoon teaching has elements of composition in it, because it's a great way to encourage individuality and validate individuality, because there's no such thing as best at that thing.
Right, and it seems like such a great way to de-emphasize competition, which
Mm-hmm.
can be so obstructive to community building
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
Dave was wondering, you mentioned on your website the importance of graphic notation to your work with children. This seems like something that would also fit well in your concepts for recentered music learning. Is that the case? And if so, how do you use it in your teaching?
This was another unit in my studio class. We did a couple of weeks on just graphic notation, because it's another way to even the playing field. Everybody, even me, can participate in understanding that a squiggly line goes up and then down and is a certain character and is a smoothness. And when Trade Winds Ensemble is teaching composition, we always start with and keep graphic notation as a main medium. And some of the inspiration for that comes from John Cage's aria for solo voice, where it's all graphic notation and is very aleatoric, but you can still understand so many fundamentals of music. But again, it allows accessible and equitable participation no matter the experience coming into that.
Yeah, it's also, I've seen composers use it as an act of decolonization as well, rejecting Western musical notation. Elizabeth Baker, Raven Chacon, and I've both seen do that purposefully for decolonial acts of resilience, which is really cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Zachary Brown wonders, can this be applied to music education as well, in terms of becoming a band director in that setting?
I think this is again one of the big like challenging systems because it emphasizes precision and um, I one of the things that I wish was more in bands, even if you're preparing for a competition or striving for excellence and striving for um, unity, I wish there was more play because these are children. Uh, People in a band class are kids, and I wish there were more. Even in a like traditional band class where you have to meet benchmarks and stick to a curriculum and make a school and parents happy. What if there were still a couple of days of improv and graphic notation and chamber groups who compose pieces together, something that's playful and some moment where it doesn't matter if you're the best and the most precise. I think even in that structure, anybody can build in opportunities for play and agency and validation. And that's getting closer to what I'm arguing for us to do.
Awesome. Last call for questions. And if everyone's had their chance to ask in this forum, I vote that we move over to the happy hour where we can digest as a group and we'll have some debriefing and get to enjoy each other's company. The link is in the chat, megquigley.org/happy hour. That will give you the Zoom link to come hang out with Midori and all of us. So can't wait to see you there. Midori, thank you so much for this fantastic chat and all of your hard work you're doing. This is really exciting stuff. Can't thank you enough on behalf of
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you in a minute with a glass of wine in my hand.
Sounds good. All there.
Thanks.